Hey, what's going on, Black people? I hope you guys are having a good day. I'm gonna give you guys time to come into the chat. I am real excited about this conversation. Very excited, actually. This is going to be a great, informative discussion. I want to first of all welcome everybody. Welcome to Dr. Boyce TV. This is the home for intelligent Black people. So if you're not Black and intelligent, you probably want to leave. I'm gonna try not to cuss today because I got a special guest today, and I'm gonna try to
Thank you, brother.
act like I got home training. But everybody, please, when you come in, as you come in, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button. Welcome to everybody also on the African History Network. I think you guys are going to enjoy this conversation. You won't see the guests, but you'll be able to hear the guests. If you'd like to see the guests, just go to drboycetv.com. That's drboycetv.com, and you can see the guests. Today's special guest is Professor Anthony Browder. Professor Browder is one of the most respected historians and Egyptologists around the world. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio to you. He's an author, publisher, cultural historian, educational consultant. He is the founder and director of IKG Cultural Resources. He's devoted 35 years to researching ancient Egyptian history, science, philosophy, and culture. He's traveled to Egypt 52 times since 1980, and I bet that number's higher than 52 because I know he's going this week. And he's actually the first African American to fund and coordinate an archaeological dig in Egypt. He's led 20 archaeological missions to Egypt since 2009, and also he and his daughter Atlantis, right? It's Atlantis, right? Is that your daughter's name?
Oh, yeah, yeah. You taught her when she was at Hampton, brother.
You kidding me? I taught your daughter.
Yes, you did. Yes,
Oh,
you
wow. That's pretty good. I didn't know that. But yeah, so he and Dr. Browder and his daughter, it's a beautiful legacy thing as well. For those of you who have kids, you'll love this. They actually do excavations together, and they work together, and they don't just work to get a paycheck or for a job. They work because this is actually knowledge and information that most of us don't have about ourselves. That helps our community. So I hope you guys will take a second, give a digital round of applause to Professor Browder. So without further ado, my brother, how are you today?
I'm excellent, man. I'm really pleased to be on your show today and to interact with you and to talk about whatever it is you have in mind to discuss with you and your followers. I'm honored.
Well, I'd like to start and dive right into it. You and I met, and I'll tell the story, quickly. You and I met actually on a flight back from Guyana, and we known of each other, but we actually met in person for the first time on a 5 a.m. flight to Guyana. And the day was already interesting because Guyana is not a big country. It's not a place where most of us don't know a lot of people who fly to Guyana. At least I don't. And so I don't expect at 5 a.m. to bump into anybody that I know if I'm getting on a 5 a.m. flight to Guyana. But first I bumped into Nuri Muhammad from the Nation of Islam, who's a wonderful guy, a good brother. I respect him a lot. And that right there was kind of strange. And then on the flight, I saw you, and you and I were talking. And then I started getting nervous. I said, this is a weird dream or something. What's going on? And so that's how you and I got a chance to talk, and we covered a lot of interesting issues. I remember specifically, and I'll just kind of start with this. When you talk about activism in the community, there's a whole conversation now about Black identity extremists and the way they're sort of seen by the federal government. You and I actually had a conversation about methods used by the government to undermine Black activism and Black progress in the past. COINTELPRO operations where maybe people are planted in the community, create chaos, cause confusion. I'd like to start there. I know that this is not exact. I'd love to get into your realm as an Egyptologist and everything else, but that COINTELPRO conversation really stuck with me. And I'd love for you, based on your experience in this thing for such a long time, to kind of speak to that in terms of how younger people can learn, from what you know.
Sure. Just to clarify a couple of points, we met on the flight back from Guyana. So we were leaving Guyana, coming back to the States.
Yes.
And I've been traveling to Guyana. I've been to Guyana maybe 7 times since 2012. I did a study tour to Egypt in 2012 and had 6 people on that study tour who were from Guyana. A number of them had attended Howard University. And so they came together, did the study tour, and as a result of that study tour, we were friends for life. and a number of them are working in the Guyanese government, and they brought me over several times to do presentations. So just to put Guyana into a larger historical and cultural context, Guyana is the home of Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Van Sertima wrote They Came Before Columbus. I met him February 21st, 1977. Ivan Van Sertima was the first black person, the first person I ever met who told me that the ancient Egyptians were black and not white. Everything that I had learned prior to 1977 had reinforced the lie that the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, were white people. Guyana is also the home of George G.M. James, who wrote Stolen Legacy. George G.M. James was born in Georgetown, Guyana, taught at what is now University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. He wrote Stolen Legacy in 1954, and he was murdered in 1955. Dr. Ben tells the story that George G.M. James was murdered in a ritualistic Masonic murder. His throat was cut from ear to ear, his tongue was cut out, he was disemboweled, and his intestines were thrown to the west. This is a ritualistic Masonic murder for revealing certain secret information. So that book, Stolen Legacy, was out of print from 1955 until 1977, when Asa Hilliard, who was teaching at San Francisco State, had a copy of that book, gave a copy of Julian Richardson of Marcus Bookstore, who reprinted that book and put it back in circulation. So Marcus Bookstore is celebrating its 60th anniversary in October. So there's this interesting history of information and attempts made by the powers that be that to suppress certain information that would transform the consciousness of African people. If you don't know who you are, you don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. So books such as Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James and They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima, two books written by two sons of Guyana that Europeans have sought to suppress, because the information contained within that book takes us back to the Nile Valley, shows us the Nile Valley as an indigenous African creation that was usurped by Europeans who have covered up the fact that Egypt is in Africa, and ancient Egypt, or Kemet, is the oldest documented civilization known to mankind. So with that information being moved to the back burner, then others can continue to miseducate us. So that is a larger historical and cultural context for COINTELPRO, for the government's efforts to minimize people of African ancestry in the 1960s to attempt to reconnect with some memory of their ancestral homeland. So I'm from Chicago, brother. Born in 1951, came of age in the 1960s. I remember the Black Panther Party. I remember the Nation of Islam. I remember all the powerful and significant things that black folk were doing on the south side and the west side of Chicago. I remember COINTELPRO. I understand how the government took down the Black Panther Party. I remember when Fred Hampton was murdered. I was a freshman at the University of Illinois when Fred Hampton was murdered. I knew the sister who was in the house the night that he was murdered, the sister who supposedly fired the shotgun down this narrow corridor at police and missed the point-blank range. So I had an opportunity to listen to her tell her story and then to monitor the news as State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan gave the official Chicago Mayor Daley report of the Fred Hampton shooting. And their version of the shooting was entirely different to the history that we now know. We know that Fred Hampton was drugged and he was asleep. And these cops came in and shot him in his bed. That this was an effort to take him out of action so that this young, I think he was 21, 22 years old when he was murdered. So this brother would not raise the consciousness of other black people who were attempting to reprogram their thinking by aligning themselves with accurate historical and cultural information that would change their conceptual trajectory. So this whole COINTELPRO to suppress the Black Panther Party, COINTEL efforts to suppress the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam had its base in Chicago, and at one time, over 40% of the members of the Nation of Islam were government agents, were part of COINTELPRO. So this.
Wait, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Did you say what was that percentage again?
Over 40% of members of the Nation of Islam were working for the government or police departments. As a matter of fact, you remember when Malcolm X was assassinated. You remember the photograph of the brother who was giving Malcolm mouth-to-mouth resuscitation after he had been shot in the chest. He was a New York Police Department informant. This was Malcolm's bodyguard. He was an informant. So we've had this level of infiltration of our leadership and our organizations for, decades. We only know of COINTELPRO. There are other operations that have been going on that we will never know about that have been extremely successful. But the issue is, despite these efforts to put blinders on our consciousness and to keep us thinking and acting like niggas, like Negroes, there has been a groundswell of effort on the part of scholars like George G.M. James, like Ivan Van Sertima, like John Henry Clark, like Asa Hilliard, like so many others, like Dr. Francis Chris Welsing, like so many others who have been consistent in standing their historical and cultural ground and making sure that certain information was passed down from generation to generation. So I am blessed to have left Chicago in 1971. I transferred from the University of Illinois to Howard University because I was ready to leave Chicago. I was tired of being shot at. I was tired of being beat up by white folk for being in the wrong neighborhood. I was tired of being beaten up by black folk from being in the wrong neighborhood, and just wanted to go to another place where I can experience a different quality of life. And I found that in D.C. So I've been living in D.C. for 48 years. D.C. afforded me the opportunity to connect with conscientious black folk from all over the world who introduced me to knowledge and information that I never would have been exposed to had I stayed in Chicago. And as a result of that relationship, I am now doing things that I never imagined that I would be doing. So this transformation from the west side of Chicago to excavating tombs on the west bank of Luxor is part of my journey. And I can credit my success to having been in the presence of brothers and sisters who had their own network of knowledge, historical and knowledge transfer, and that I was honored and blessed to have personal relationships with a number of scholars, to have business relationships with these scholars, and they prepared me to do the work that I'm doing. So now at this point in my career, I'm passing it on. I have socialized my daughter. I have immersed her in this history and culture. We have a number of national programs in place right now where we're working with other young people and creating a pipeline of archaeologists, Egyptologists, historians, scholars, architects, engineers, so that we can replicate the work that we're doing and ensure that this information will thrive long after we're gone, so that despite the efforts of elements within the United States government, British intelligence, MI6, MI5, French intelligence, German intelligence, Spanish intelligence, to suppress the historical knowledge of African people, we are still moving forward. And we are in a position at this particular point in time in history where nothing that they have done will be able to stop what is in motion right now. So even though America appears to be going to hell, and it's a well-deserved journey to hell, there are opportunities available to people who are prepared mentally, culturally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, to be able to right this ship when America goes down, so that we can take full advantage of the economic, social, and cultural things that we have inherited as a result of Africans in America being the wealthiest and best educated African people on the planet. And despite the dysfunction going on in our community, there are brothers and sisters and communities all throughout the United States who are doing good work. And we're in a position to ensure that the legacy that has been passed on to us will be managed and preserved such that it will be passed down to our descendants and will transform the consciousness of generations yet to be born.